Hi everybody. So you've purchased our Build a Quilt basic block set 1 for piecing in the hoop, or you're thinking about it and you've been thinking, do I have to only do one at a time? Can I do multiples in the hoop? Well, that's a great question, and you've tuned into the perfect video because that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. I'm just going to show you simply how you can piece 2 half square triangles in a 5x7 hoop, and then you can adjust this to bigger hoops and more multiples if you like. And I'll give you a few tips and tricks along the way. Hi everybody, I'm Diana from Sew in Common, the home of Build a Quilt, where we piece our quilts and quilt blocks in the hoop of our embroidery machine. So today I am going to use just a 5x7 hoop. Normally I use a 6x6 because I love that hoop that works with my Baby Lock and Brother machines. But because you only really need a 5x7 hoop to stitch out any of the blocks that come in our Build a Quilt basic set 1, I'm going to show you how to do 2 3x3 half square triangles in the 5x7 hoop. And as you can see, I've already got my stabilizer on there. So I will just go ahead and slip that onto my machine. So this is the block that we're going to do, the half square triangle. This would also work for your squares as well, or you could do 2 of the halves of your quarter square triangle in one hooping and then put them together. In fact, I think you would probably do more than that. I didn't quite calculate that one out because you know that the quarter square triangle takes 2 halves and then they're stitched together, because you can't do a complete 4 section flip and stitch with a quarter square because your last piece wouldn't flip. Let me just grab one, and then I think it's a small one that I have done here, but one of the little 2x2s. So if you're doing a quarter square, you stitch 1/2 and 1/2. In fact, I have 2 halves here. You stitch it out in 2 halves. Then you place them together and you stitch them together using the guideline that is already on here, so you don't have to worry about a 1/4 inch foot or any of that to get your perfect 1/4 inch for your seam. But the reason why we don't, and I've explained this before in other videos, the reason why you can't do this whole thing all in one go is because, yes, you could start here and then you could stitch this side on and this side on, but look at the bottom one. How am I going to stitch that in there? Because I would have to stitch down 2 seams. That gives me an interior seam that can't be done in flip and stitch. Nobody can do it in the flip and stitch method. That's just the way this particular one and some others are. But remember, that's not a problem because you'll have your 1/4 inch seam guide stitched on the back of your piece, and you'll just be able to stitch those together like that. So that one I'm not going to do in the hoop today. I'm just going to show you the half square triangles in the 3-inch size. And here's a tip for you. If you're doing 3-inch blocks or even 2-inch, and you have leftover 5x5 squares or charm squares, use those for your scrappy half square triangles. So as you can see for today, I've cut them in half because I've prepped them. You have your 5x5 and you cut it on the diagonal. And then I've also prepped some white squares. So this is what I like to do when I'm doing half squares that are going to be scrappy. I do them with white. I just cut out white that's in my stash, and then I make them with whatever my charm squares that I have left over. And each charm square will give me 2 half square triangles. So that's really a nice way to use up those half square triangles, or those charm squares, sorry. So today we're going to stitch these out, and I'm going to show you on my machine how you use your arrows. Now, your arrows for moving things around might be different on your machine than on mine, but the idea is the same, okay? So let's go ahead and flip over to my other camera at the machine. There we go. Excuse me. And let's go ahead and come over. I'm going to move my camera over to my screen here. try to make sure that you can see it. There you go. I changed the color background and also you could actually see it. With a white background, you can't see anything. So here is my half square triangle. It's on here. Now there is a lighter color line that you don't see because I had to darken it. But what you're going to do is you're going to move this square into the upper left-hand corner. So I'm going to click my edit. I'm going to click move. And I'm going to take this arrow right here and I'm going to move it all the way as far left as it will go. And then I'm going to take my upper arrow and move it as far up as it'll go. Now, do you see where it moved my foot? Let's reset it. And now you can watch it move it. So I'm moving it all the way over to the left and I'm moving it all the way up. That gives me the placement for my first half square triangle. Now I'm going to piece in black today so that you can see it. And I've got my scissors, I've got my glue stick, I've got a seam roller, and I've got my stiletto if I need it. So this is step 1. And now our next step that comes up is also stitched directly on the stabilizer. Remember that when you are piecing in the hoop, your first piece of fabric is always laid out right side up or pretty side of your fabric up. Now, it doesn't matter too much because mine's going to be white, but if you're using a pattern and it's going to be laid down, like if I were using this for my first piece, I would lay it with the pattern side up. And I'm just going to give myself a couple little swipes there of my glue stick. And I'm going to lay down my first piece. And I can see through this white to kind of line that right up at 1/4 inch, but I can also feel it. If it's not exactly 1/4 inch right here on the seam, if it's a little more, that's fine. Now I'm going to stitch this down with the next step. This takes about 2 minutes to stitch down, not very long at all. Now I'm going to take my first or my second piece of fabric, but my first print in this case, and my second and all subsequent pieces of fabric are laid right side down. If you've read the instruction with your Build a Quilt set, or if you watched the video, or if you watched any of my other videos here on YouTube where I stitch out, it's the same process. So I've laid that down. Now I'm going to stitch them together. I've got just the wee little bit of that bottom fabric showing, like what I call a hair's width. It's very tiny. Okay. Now I'm going to put a little swipe of glue in the bottom box, the bottom half. And I'm going to flip this. Now at this time, you could use a seam roller to get that down. With the glue, it holds it there really nicely. And now I'm going to stitch that down. And I've got my tape ready for my final piece. And if you've never done this, you're going to see why I use a little bit of tape here in just a second. Okay, so the very last step, I'm going to take this out for a sec. The very last step is to stitch your guideline all the way around again. The first time you did it on the stabilizer, that was your boundary. Now you're going to stitch your guideline. And the reason we do this is kind of, it reinforces the guideline on the back for when you're piecing your, if you're piecing anything together on your sewing machine. And it also will connect any place where your two fabrics join. So sometimes you're going to have a lot of joins depending on the block you're making, but with a half square triangle, you only really need to use one piece of tape because your line is going to stitch this way, down, this way, and up. So I'm going to put a little piece of tape here so that my foot goes right across without getting stuck on this fabric. I don't need to do it down here because it's going in this direction and it's not going to be able to pull that back. So let me place this back in, grab my tape. I always use a bigger piece, put just a little bit on there, and then I can pull it off later, and I can keep using it for several squares. That back in. And now we'll stitch down this bottom piece, or we'll stitch down our final guideline. And we have one square done, one 3-inch square done. Now, when I'm doing multiples, I like to make sure that I don't have to worry about this fabric right here getting into my next square. So what I do typically is I bring it out and I just do a little cut like that, just a little diagonal cut. Not all the way up to the line. I still have plenty of line there or fabric there for when I trim it out, but I just kind of get that out of the way. Now, put this back in. Let's go back over to our screen. Now, I am going to, as you can see, I'm up here in the top. So I'm going to bring this all the way down, as far down as it will go, and as far over to the right as it will go. So now do you see where it's put it? It's put it in the opposite bottom corner. That's going to let me get in another 3-inch block on this particular piece. And so I stitched enough away so that my foot and all is going to miss it. That's great, no problem. Now I'm starting all over again. Now, I haven't checked it. I don't think you could do another 2-inch on each side. I don't think there's quite enough room, but I know in this 5x7 hoop, you could do 4 of your 2x2 squares if you wanted to. Could you do 2 4s? No, because you need at least 8 inches in your height. So 2 3s or 4 2s is as much as you're going to get in a 5x7 hoop. But you can extrapolate that out to your bigger hoops. And then when we come back over, I'm going to give you another little hint on doing multiples. I'm going to lay my first fabric out again. And it's okay that this is up here over top of the other one because it's not going to stitch out up there. Now this is going to stitch down. And I know why a lot of you have asked me about this. It's because you don't want to waste stabilizer. I get that. And I also do multiples when I can in this fashion, but my 6x6 hoop, I love it. And as I recommend in the Build a Block how-to video and some of my other videos, when you are just starting, do several, maybe a dozen squares in a single hooping until you're completely used to the process. And then if you want to do multiples, that's fine too. Okay, now I'm going to put my little bit of glue right there and flip this fabric. And I'll give it a little roll with my seam roller. And do that stitch down. And then we'll do the guide box. And like I said, this is a great way to use up your stash, because when you do any leftover charm squares, if you take your larger pieces of fabric when they're left over from, say, a fat quarter, and you cut them down into 5x5s, it's perfect for using that. And like I said, I just put them together with white fabric because before you know it, trust me, you're going to have plenty of these little scrappy squares to put into a beautiful scrappy quilt. And there are so many scrappy quilts that you can do with half square triangles or just squares or the quarter squares. So I love using them for this size block. I got a package of squares once from England. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Because here we are. We have now done both of those. So I'm going to bring us back to our main camera. Wasn't that easy to do these? Yeah, love it. Not hard at all. Then, as we have in our other videos and how it shows you in the how-to, trimming them out. In fact, I think that's a 4x4, but these are our 3x3s that are in here. So the one thing that you can do if you're going to do multiples, especially if you're doing multiples, some machines come with a 7x12 hoop. That sounds great, but really hoops like that are made for doing long, continuous embroidery. And they're not the best when it comes to doing multiples of things, because that height and the skinny little width tends to want to make things start to shift around in that hoop, like your stabilizer. It's just an artifact of how it works. You're not doing anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with your machine or your hoop. It's just an artifact of the fact that every machine will shimmy a little bit when it's stitching, and that tugs and pulls even the littlest bit. And so what I learned to do from another embroiderer long time ago, I don't have, do you know what the T-pins are? They're a straight pin with a T-bar at the top. I don't have one over here with me. Those work great for this process. But what she does is she comes to the outside of her hoop. Let me bring my camera down a little so you can see this. There we go. She comes to her top of her hoop here, or she does it on all sides. I'm doing it at the top. And she puts this pin, this T-pin. You could use a pin like this. It wouldn't have to be a T-pin. She puts a couple of them all the way around. That takes up the distance between your stabilizer and your hoop, and it keeps it from pulling this stabilizer down. So it helps it from shimmying a little bit around in the hoop. I find that occasionally it will still shimmy a little bit, but that can be very helpful. So that's a tip that you could use for that. I honestly don't remember the lady's name. I know she has a website and everything, so I do apologize. But then all you have to do is pop these out of your hoop, trim them up, re-hoop, and you're off to the races to do more. And as you can see, I have a whole little stack of them here that I'm going to do. And then I have a little bag like this, mesh bag. Great. You can get these in bulk at, I'm just going to tell you, at Amazon. That's where I get them. And I keep all of my pre-done things in them. And I keep these until it's as full as I can get it, with my half square triangles and my other pieces that I pre-do for scrappiness. And then one day I'll just take that bag out, start laying them out and having fun, making my own little jigsaw on my design board. And I just play. I don't get out any particular pattern even. I just sit there and play with them. And when I like them, I start stitching them together, and I come up with a wall quilt or a baby quilt. Some of the funnest baby quilts I've made for people, or that I've gotten the best compliments on, have been totally scrappy like this. They love it. And they kind of mean something to me too, because I can say, oh, I know I use that fabric in that quilt and that fabric in that quilt. So they're fun to do. And so I always leave these bags a little bit open because they do have a little bit of a coating on the mesh, and I like to make sure I keep some air in there circulating around my fabric. But that is creating multiples in a hoop. Okay, very simple to do with just moving your starting point around on your machine. And so play with it. Don't even stitch it out yet. Put a piece of stabilizer in your hoop and just play with those arrows to see where it moves the foot. Okay, that way you'll get the idea. Now, if you have a hoop that is, say, an 8 by 12, you could certainly do more multiples in that. If you had some of those big, huge, gargantuan hoops, yes, you can. Just be really careful when you do those bigger hoops. The bigger the hoop, the more it's going to want to shimmy and move things around. That's just the way that happens. That's from experience, I can tell you. So I have an 8 by 8 hoop, and occasionally I will use it for multiples. And I don't seem to have problems with that. Where I tend to have the most problems doing multiples when I'm increasing my hoop size is when my hoop is a rectangle. Okay, so a 5 by 7 is a rectangle, but that's a smaller hoop. But if I'm doing a 7 by 12, I'll guarantee you every time I will have problems at some point. That's why that little pin trick can help you, okay? All right, everybody. So this is Diana at Sew in Common, and today we've been stitching multiples with the Build A Quilt system in the hoop. You can get our Build A Quilt in the Hoop Basic Block Set 1 over at our website, sewincommon.com. It's still at its introductory price, so take advantage. Please, please, please send me any questions that you have at support@sewincommon.com. Be very specific for what you're asking. I had a lady ask me a question. I answered it, and it wasn't really, her question wasn't really what she was asking. She was asking something else. There was miscommunication. And unfortunately, she wasn't happy because she thought she was going to do something different. So just be real specific with your questions, okay? And we'll get them answered because we want you to be happy with this system and make lots of gorgeous quilts, okay? So send me those questions that you have at support@sewincommon.com. Please start posting your photos over on our Facebook page, Sew in Common, so that we can see them. And until next time, everybody, go sew life beautiful. Bye for now.